Delphina, you're late for school again.
Her mom's voice thundered through the house, snapping Delphina out of her perfect dream where she was a princess ruling a kingdom of chocolate. She groaned loudly, pulling the blanket over her head like it was armor against reality.
5 more minutes.
Not a single minute. If you miss that bus again, you're walking all the way to school.
That got her. Delphina bolted upright, her messy hair sticking out in every direction. She had exactly 10 minutes to get ready. 10. Scrambling like a cat on a wet floor, she dashed to her drawers, pulling out her uniform and shoving her arms into the sleeves like she was wrestling an octopus. She grabbed her books, tossed them into her backpack, and raced downstairs so fast her socks nearly made her skid face-first into the fridge. But she was too late. As she reached the front window, she saw the school bus rolling away like a slow-motion scene in a disaster movie.
Mom, please, you have to drive me.
She wailed, rushing toward the car. Her mom was already shaking her head.
This is the 3rd time this week, Delphina. I don't know what I'm going to do with you.
When they screeched to a stop in front of Barrow Hill Academy, Delphina jumped out before the car even fully stopped, waving a rushed
Thanks, Mom.
behind her. She sprinted through the school gates, her bag bouncing on her shoulder, and slid into her classroom just as the bell rang. She thought she was safe until she looked at her assigned seat. Sitting right there, next to her desk, was Alaric Whitmore. The king of smugness. The emperor of annoying. The bane of her existence since the 3rd grade. Delphina froze, praying some miracle would move him somewhere, anywhere else. But miracles were apparently taking the day off. With a sigh, she sank into her seat, keeping her eyes fixed on the desk. She could feel his smirk before she even saw it.
Good morning, sunshine.
Alaric drawled, tossing his notebook onto her desk without even looking at her.
Take my notes.
Delphina clenched her fists, her fingers twitching with the urge to chuck the notebook at his perfectly smug face. But Alaric was not someone to mess with. One glare from him, and she'd be the school's favorite joke by lunchtime. So, with a dramatic sigh, she opened his notebook, muttering under her breath about how much she wanted to be back in her bed right now. Miss Harridan strode into the classroom, her heels clicking like a warning alarm.
Settle down, everyone. Pop quiz today.
She said, dropping a heavy stack of papers onto her desk with a thud. Delphina's heart sank. Great. A pop quiz. Could this day get any worse? The collective groan from the class was deafening. Alaric's eyes snapped open as Miss Harridan walked past their row. She stopped, fixing him with a stern glare.
Mr. Whitmore, if you fail this one too, you're going to have a long meeting with the principal and your parents.
As the teacher distributed the quiz papers, Alaric turned to Delphina. His voice was a low whisper, edged with threat.
You better give me all the right answers, Delphina, or else.
Her cheeks burned with anger. The audacity. But the fear of retaliation kept her quiet. However, as she stared at her paper, something inside her snapped. She had had enough of Alaric's bullying. With a calmness that surprised even her, Delphina wrote out all the wrong answers on a spare sheet of paper and slid it onto Alaric's desk. He smirked, completely unaware of her sabotage. The next day, as the papers were handed back, Ms. Harridan called out.
Mr. Whitmore, why don't you come up here and answer a few questions from the test?
Alaric sauntered to the front, exuding his usual confidence. But as the teacher fired question after question, his smug expression faltered. He got every single one wrong. The class erupted into laughter.
Alaric, if you don't start paying attention in class, you might end up as a Yahoo boy.
Miss Harridan said, shaking her head. The class roared even louder. Alaric returned to his seat, his fists clenched. His icy glare landed on Delphina, who kept her eyes fixed firmly on her desk, though a small, victorious grin tugged at her lips. When the school day was nearly over, Delphina decided to stop by the restroom. On her way back to class, she froze in the doorway. Alaric stood at the front of the room, holding up a small notebook. Her notebook. Her heart plummeted.
Listen to this, everyone. Dear Diary, today I saw the cutest kitten on my way home. I named him Sir Fluffington.
The class burst into uncontrollable laughter as he continued reading her secrets aloud. Delphina's face burned with humiliation. When she entered, the laughter grew louder. She glared at Alaric, her fury palpable, but he only smirked as she returned to her seat. That night, she knelt by her bed.
Lord, please make him disappear.
The next day, Alaric was gone. Weeks passed, and he didn't return. Rumors swirled around the school about his sudden departure. One day, Delphina overheard some girls in the hallway.
I heard that his dad got transferred and that they moved to France.
Delphina couldn't contain her grin. Skipping into class, she whispered under her breath.
Thank you, God.
Delphina sat in the sleek, modern lobby, nervously tapping her foot against the polished floor. The clock on the wall seemed to tick louder with every passing second, amplifying her anxiety. Clutching her phone tightly, she spoke softly to her fiancé, Jackson.
I'm so nervous, Jax. What if I mess this up?
Jackson's calm voice was steady and comforting.
Del, you've got this. You've prepared. You've prayed. And you're more than capable. Trust in God, okay?
Delphina nodded, even though he couldn't see her.
You're right. I'll trust God.
That's my girl. I love you.
I love you too.
She whispered, her nerves easing just slightly. Ending the call, she stood and smoothed her skirt, inhaling deeply to calm her racing heart. She glanced at the clock again before deciding to grab a quick glass of water from the cooler nearby. As she stood, a small blur raced across the lobby and crashed into her legs. Startled, Delphina instinctively reached out to steady the child, a little girl, no older than 6, who looked up at her with wide, apologetic eyes.
Careful there. Are you all right?
The girl nodded quickly, mumbling.
Sorry, Daddy's waiting for me.
Before darting off toward a door at the far end of the room. Delphina chuckled softly and made her way to the cooler, sipping the cold water to settle her nerves. Just as she placed the cup back on the tray, the receptionist's voice cut through the air.
Delphina Vaughn, your interview is ready.
Her heart jumped as she straightened and approached the door, forcing herself to appear composed. But the moment she stepped inside, her composure shattered. Behind the large, glossy desk sat Alaric Whitmore, impeccably dressed in a sharp suit, his expression cool and professional. Delphina froze, her stomach churning as her gaze darted to him. His eyes flicked up briefly, meeting hers without a hint of recognition.
Ms. Vaughn, please, take a seat.
He said curtly, gesturing toward the chair opposite him. She forced her legs to move, sitting down while keeping her expression neutral, though her thoughts were anything but calm. This was Alaric, the boy who had tormented her throughout school. What was he doing here, sitting in a position of power, holding her future in his hands? Her gaze shifted, and her breath caught when she noticed the little girl from earlier. She sat beside Alaric, now quietly playing with a doll on the couch. Was the child his? The question swirled in her mind, but she quickly pushed it aside as Alaric's sharp voice pulled her attention back.
I'm Alaric Whitmore. I'll be conducting your interview today.
He said, as though introducing himself for the first time, his tone businesslike and detached. Delphina's stomach churned again, but she forced herself to nod, keeping her voice steady.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Alaric's expression didn't shift as he glanced at her resume, his demeanor remaining coldly professional. The only break in his stoic exterior came when he glanced at the child, his features softening briefly.
Let's begin. Tell me a little about yourself, Miss Vaughn.
I'm Delphina Vaughn. I recently graduated with a degree in business administration and have been working part-time as an assistant in a marketing firm. I'm passionate about organization, efficiency, and helping teams work smoothly together. I believe I can bring those qualities to this role as your secretary.
Alaric's expression didn't shift, his gaze sharp and unreadable.
What would you say is your strongest skill in an office environment?
I'm very detail-oriented. I believe attention to detail is crucial for staying organized and ensuring things run smoothly. I make sure no task, no matter how small, is overlooked.
Alaric nodded curtly, making a small note on the notepad in front of him.
And how do you handle high-pressure situations?
I stay calm and focused. I prioritize tasks, break them into manageable steps, and adapt quickly when something urgent comes up. Communication is key in such moments, and I always ensure everyone is kept in the loop.
How do you feel about handling confidential information, especially in a high-profile role like this?
I understand the importance of confidentiality. I'm trustworthy and meticulous about maintaining privacy. I know how crucial trust is in a position like this.
Good. One final question. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Delphina carefully considered her words before responding.
In 5 years, I'd like to have grown within the company. I aim to refine my skills further, take on more responsibilities, and ultimately contribute significantly to the team's success. My goal is to be someone the company can truly rely on.
Alaric scribbled another note, though for a brief moment, his attention shifted to his daughter. She was holding up a colorful drawing for him, her face beaming with pride. A fleeting softness crossed his features, a stark contrast to his otherwise stoic demeanor. Delphina noticed the change, though she quickly looked away, pretending not to see. When Alaric's focus returned to her, his professional mask was firmly back in place.
Thank you, Miss Vaughn. We'll contact you soon with our decision,
he said, standing up and extending a hand. Delphina rose as well, shaking his hand with a polite smile.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Whitmore.
Her heart raced as she turned to leave the room, her heels clicking softly against the floor. The surreal nature of the interview played over and over in her mind. She had managed to maintain her professionalism, but there was no denying the tension beneath the surface's years of unresolved history, awkwardness, and now this bizarre twist of fate. It was a Sunday afternoon, and Delphina had just returned from church. Her heart felt lighter, the morning sermon still echoing in her mind. As she stepped into her cozy apartment, she placed her purse on the table and made her way toward her desk. Sitting down, she opened her laptop, a soft hum filling the room. Her breath hitched when she noticed the email subject line, "Job offer from Whitmore Enterprises." Her fingers hovered above the trackpad for a moment before she clicked it open.
Dear Miss Vaughn, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for the position of Executive Secretary. We look forward to having you join our team. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to discuss the next steps. Sincerely, Alaric Whitmore.
Delphina let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. God had done it. After all the nerves and doubts, she had landed the job. A smile tugged at her lips as she quickly typed out her reply, confirming her acceptance. Hitting send, she leaned back in her chair, her mind buzzing with anticipation. What would it be like working for him? Would they maintain a strictly professional relationship, or would the tangled history between them seep into the office? Later that evening, Delphina couldn't wait to share the news with her fiancé, Jackson.
Guess what?
She exclaimed as soon as he picked up the phone.
I got the job!
That's amazing, babe. I knew you'd crush it. I'm so proud of you.
Jackson replied warmly, his tone laced with pride. Delphina smiled at his encouragement but took a deep breath as the weight of the situation hit her.
Thanks, Jax. But there's something you should know.
What is it?
My boss is Alaric Whitmore.
There was a noticeable pause on the other end of the line.
Wait, the Alaric? From school?
Yeah, the one and only.
She said with a half laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes.
Wow, that's unexpected. But you've got this, babe. Just trust God and keep your head up.
I will, Jax. Thanks.
After hanging up, Delphina sighed, making her way to the kitchen to prepare dinner. As she chopped vegetables, her mind kept circling back to Alaric. The thought of seeing him again, not as the boy who used to torment her, but as her boss, was a strange one. It made her uneasy, but there was also a flicker of curiosity she couldn't quite ignore. The following days passed quickly, and soon, it was her first day at Whitmore Enterprises. Delphina carefully picked out an outfit that was both professional and authentically her. Standing before the full-length mirror in her bedroom, she adjusted her blazer and nodded to herself. She was ready. As she stepped into the sleek office building, she couldn't help but feel a mix of awe and nerves. The receptionist greeted her with a bright smile.
Good morning, Miss Vaughn. Mr. Whitmore is expecting you. Right this way.
Delphina nodded, murmuring her thanks as she followed the receptionist through the modern office space. The quiet hum of activity filled the air, and every step felt heavier than the last. When they reached Alaric's private office, Delphina knocked gently before stepping inside. He was seated at his large, polished desk, flipping through a file. At the sound of the door, he glanced up, his piercing gaze meeting hers. His expression gave nothing away.
Miss Vaughn, I trust you're ready to begin?
Yes, Mr. Whitmore.
She replied, keeping her voice steady despite the tension in the air. Alaric didn't offer a smile or any semblance of warmth, but he gestured toward the chair opposite him.
Please, have a seat.
Delphina sat down, smoothing her skirt and clasping her hands together in her lap. She could feel the weight of his eyes on her, and it took everything in her not to squirm. She had no idea what to expect, but one thing was clear, this wasn't going to be easy. As the days passed, Delphina quickly adapted to her role. She balanced calls, organized schedules, and managed paperwork like a pro. Alaric was efficient and direct, his tone never slipping into the arrogance she had braced herself for. But what truly caught her off guard was Emily. Nearly every morning, the little girl would dash into the office, her small frame wrapping tightly around her father's leg. Alaric's icy demeanor thawed in her presence, and Emily, in turn, seemed to take a special liking to Delphina. Delphina's heart clenched every time they spoke, after Emily told her about her mother who had passed away. One quiet Saturday morning, her phone buzzed unexpectedly. Alaric's name flashed on the screen. She answered hesitantly, her voice calm despite the slight flutter in her chest.
Delphina.
Alaric began, sounding unusually flustered.
I hope I'm not interrupting. Emily's nanny called in sick, and I have an important business meeting abroad. I was wondering if you could stay with her for a few days. She's been asking about you lately, and I'd feel better knowing she's with someone she trusts.
Delphina blinked, momentarily caught off guard. She had never spent time with Emily outside the office, but she could hear the tension in Alaric's voice.
Of course, Mr. Whitmore. I'd be happy to.
Thank you, Delphina. I know it's a lot to ask.
Alaric said, his relief evident.
If you need anything, call me directly.
When Delphina arrived at Alaric's home that afternoon, Emily's face lit up the moment she walked in.
Miss Delphina!
Emily cried, running to hug her. Delphina laughed, warmth filling her chest.
Hey, Emily. How about we have some fun?
Can we bake cookies?
Emily asked eagerly. Delphina chuckled.
Cookies it is.
The kitchen soon filled with laughter, the smell of freshly baked treats, and Emily's giggles as flowers somehow ended up in her hair. By bedtime, Emily was curled up in Delphina's lap, sleepily listening to a story.
Miss Delphina, can you stay forever?
She murmured. Delphina's heart tightened.
I'll stay as long as you need me.
She whispered, smoothing Emily's hair. The days passed quickly, filled with laughter and whispered conversations. Emily shared stories about school, her dreams, and even hesitated before admitting.
Daddy's fiance doesn't like me. She's always busy or yelling when Daddy's not around. But you're fun.
Delphina bit back her reaction, her resolve hardening. She would make Emily feel as loved as possible. When Alaric returned, Emily greeted him with an excited rundown of her time with Delphina. Alaric listened attentively, occasionally glancing at Delphina with a look she couldn't quite place.
Thank you. Emily clearly adores you.
She's a wonderful little girl.
Delphina replied, smiling. Alaric nodded.
I'll ensure you're compensated.
That's not necessary. I was happy to help.
Delphina interrupted softly.
Please.
He insisted, his tone firm but kind. Before she could respond, Emily dashed back, grabbing both their hands.
Can we all have dinner together soon?
Delphina hesitated, glancing at Alaric. To her surprise, he smiled and nodded.
I think that's a great idea.
It was a warm evening, and Alaric had insisted on taking Delphina and Emily out to dinner as a gesture of gratitude for her help with Emily. The restaurant he chose was an elegant yet cozy spot, with soft jazz playing in the background and the aroma of freshly baked bread filling the air. Emily clutched Delphina's hand, chattering excitedly about dessert options. Alaric followed behind them, his sharp suit drawing attention from the diners. But then, a familiar laugh rang out, freezing both Alaric and Delphina mid-step. They turned in unison, their gazes locking on a table by the window. Delphina's stomach dropped. There, leaning close to each other, were another woman and Jackson. The woman's hand rested lightly on Jackson's arm. And he was whispering something that had her throwing her head back in laughter, a sight too intimate to ignore. Alaric's jaw tightened as he glared at the woman, while Delphina felt her chest constrict as she registered the betrayal etched in Jackson's casual grin. Emily tugged at her hand, sensing the sudden tension.
What's wrong?
She asked innocently. Delphina turned to Emily, her voice calm.
Sweetheart, why don't you go sit at that table over there for a minute? I'll join you soon.
Alaric gestured to a nearby server.
Please make sure she's comfortable,
he said, his voice steady but chilling. Emily looked between them curiously but followed the server without protest. Once Emily was out of earshot, Alaric and Delphina marched to the table with synchronized purpose.
Lydia,
Alaric said, his voice cold enough to chill the room. Both Lydia and Jackson turned, their faces draining of color.
Alaric!
Lydia stammered, pulling her hand back from Jackson's arm. Jackson's eyes widened as he spotted Delphina.
Delphina, I didn't expect.
Clearly.
Delphina cut him off, her voice sharper than usual. She folded her arms, her glare fixed on Jackson.
Mind explaining why my fiancé is having dinner with his future wife's boss's fiancé?
Lydia's eyes narrowed defensively.
And who are you to question me?
She snapped, attempting to recover her composure. Delphina's lips twitched into a humorless smile.
I'm Alaric's secretary, and your boyfriend's fiancé. Does that clear things up for you?
The room seemed to hold its breath. Alaric's gaze flickered between Lydia and Jackson, his tone clipped as he said,
this just gets more ridiculous by the second.
Alaric, I can explain.
There's no need. You've already said everything you needed to by being here.
Jackson tried to rise, his hands up in a gesture of surrender.
It's not what it looks like.
Don't.
Delphina's voice silenced him. Her calm exterior cracked just enough to show her fury.
You've done enough damage already.
Alaric turned his attention back to Lydia, his voice dropping to a low, controlled whisper.
Whatever excuses you have, I don't care. But if your actions affect my daughter in any way, I'll make sure you regret it.
Lydia visibly flinched, her confidence crumbling under his gaze. Delphina stood frozen, her heart pounding from the intensity of Alaric's words. As the silence thickened, Alaric glanced toward their table, where Emily was happily drawing on her menu. His expression softened momentarily before he turned back to Delphina.
Let's go. Emily doesn't need to see this.
The tension followed them as they returned to the table, but Emily's bright smile was enough to melt some of the ice.
Can we order dessert now?
She chirped. Alaric chuckled softly, ruffling her hair.
Of course, sweetheart.
As they settled into their seats, Alaric leaned toward Delphina, his voice low.
Thank you for always putting her first.
Delphina's heart skipped a beat at his words. For a brief moment, the chaos of the evening faded, leaving only the warmth of Alaric's gratitude and the small, glowing bond they shared. It had been months since the incident with Alaric and Delphina had happened, and through all that time they got closer. All the bullying memories of him became like dust in the wind. They had become friends, and Emily was always happy to see her. One day was a special day. It was Alaric's birthday. Unbeknownst to him, Delphina and Emily had been plotting a small, heartfelt surprise. Emily, with her endless enthusiasm, had insisted it would be just the three of them: Delphina, Emily, and Alaric. Together, they decorated the living room with colorful balloons and set up a small cake, their excitement bubbling over as they waited for Alaric to return from his business trip. When the sound of his car pulling into the driveway reached their ears, Delphina felt her heart flutter with anticipation. Emily bounced on her toes, giggling, while Delphina tried to steady herself. As the door opened and Alaric stepped inside, his usually composed face broke into an expression of stunned surprise.
What's all this?
He asked, his voice warm and laced with disbelief.
Happy birthday!
Emily squealed, running to wrap her arms around him. Delphina held out a small gift, her smile soft but radiant.
Happy birthday, Alaric. We just wanted to make sure your day was special.
Alaric looked between the two of them, something unspoken flickering in his eyes.
This is perfect. You guys didn't have to go through all this trouble, but thank you, truly.
The evening passed in a haze of laughter, stories, and moments that felt like they belonged to a family. Emily, ever the bundle of energy, eventually succumbed to sleep, curling up on the couch with her blanket. Alaric carefully scooped her up and carried her to her room, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead.
Good night, princess.
He whispered before returning to the living room. Delphina stood by the couch, stretching lightly.
I should probably get going. It's late,
she said, brushing her hair behind her ear.
Wait,
he said softly. It was almost hesitant, yet there was a quiet intensity that made her turn to face him. His gaze met hers, unwavering and filled with emotion.
Delphina, there's something I need to say. Something I've been carrying for far too long.
Her breath caught as he took a step closer.
I know I haven't been the best person in the past. Back in school, I was arrogant and selfish, and I hurt you. I've regretted it ever since. You didn't deserve that, and I'm sorry, truly.
Delphina's heart clenched at the vulnerability in his tone, but before she could respond, he continued, his voice dropping to something almost reverent.
But it's more than just regret, Delphina. Over the months we've spent together, you've shown me what it means to care, to love, without expecting anything in return. You've made me realize what I've been missing all my life. I don't just admire you, I'm in love with you, and I don't want to keep it to myself anymore.
Her lips parted, a soft gasp escaping as his words sank in.
I know this might be sudden, and I know I'm not perfect, but I want to build something real with you. I want us together. Not just for me, but for Emily too. She adores you, and honestly, so do I.
The raw honesty in his voice, the way his eyes seemed to search hers for any glimmer of hope, it all made Delphina's emotions swirl. She felt her chest tighten, her mind a flurry of thoughts.
Alaric, I need to pray about this. I can't just make a decision right now.
He nodded, his expression soft yet understanding.
I get it. Take all the time you need. I'll wait for as long as it takes.
Delphina gave him a shaky smile, her heart feeling heavier and lighter all at once.
Good night, Alaric,
she said softly, turning toward the door.
Good night, Delphina.
He replied, his voice lingering like a gentle promise. As she stepped outside and closed the door behind her, she leaned against it for a moment, her mind racing. Could this be real? Could Alaric truly be the man she had always wanted but never dared to believe he could become? One thing was clear, she needed clarity, and she would seek it in prayer, trusting God to guide her next step. It had been a few days since Alaric's confession, and Delphina had spent every moment in prayer, seeking clarity. One quiet morning, she sat curled up on her couch, her Bible open on her lap, her fingers tracing the words of Ecclesiastes 4 verse 9.
2 are better than 1, because they have a good return for their labor.
The verse tugged at her heart, filling her with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. But was it really the answer? Moments later, her phone rang. It was her parents. After a few minutes of small talk, her mother's voice grew soft yet firm.
Delphina, we've been praying for you, and God gave us a verse. 2 are better than 1. We believe He's leading you toward something special.
Delphina froze. Her pulse quickened. That was the exact verse she had just read. A coincidence? Maybe. But then, an hour later, her best friend called. They chatted casually until, out of nowhere, her friend said,
I don't know why, but I feel like I need to share this verse with you. 2 are better than 1. Maybe it's a sign?
Delphina nearly dropped her phone. 3 separate confirmations. The realization sent a shiver down her spine. This was no coincidence. This was God speaking. And now, she finally knew her answer. A few days later, on her day off, she walked into Alaric's office, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was seated at his desk, focused on his laptop, his sharp features softened by the golden afternoon light.
Delphina? To what do I owe this surprise visit?
He looked up, a warm smile spreading across his face. Without a word, she placed a small gift bag on his desk, biting her lip to hide her nerves.
Just a little something.
Alaric raised an amused eyebrow and reached for the bag, pulling out a sleek leather notebook. His eyes scanned the words embossed in gold, "He who finds a wife, finds a good thing." His fingers tensed around the cover, and when he looked up, his expression was unreadable, shock, hope, something deeper.
Delphina?
His voice was hushed, almost reverent. She swallowed, her cheeks warming.
I prayed about it, and I know now, you're my answer.
Alaric stood so fast that his chair nearly toppled.
Are you saying?
She nodded, heart pounding.
Yes, Alaric, I'm saying yes. To you, to us, to everything.
Before she could blink, he closed the space between them, wrapping her in a tight embrace.
You have no idea what this means to me.
He murmured against her hair. Delphina chuckled, her heart soaring.
Well, you did say you'd wait for me.
He pulled back slightly, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch.
And I would have waited forever, but I'm glad I don't have to.
From behind the office door, a small giggle interrupted the moment. Emily peeked in, her face glowing with mischief.
Shoo! Does this mean Miss Delphina's gonna be my mommy now?
Delphina's eyes widened as Alaric let out a deep, rumbling laugh. Without hesitation, he scooped his daughter into his arms.
Yes, sweetheart, I think it does.
Delphina smiled, her vision blurring with unshed tears. In that moment, everything, every struggle, every doubt, every fear, faded away. This was home. This was love. And for the first time, she knew without a doubt. She was exactly where she was meant to be,